千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Eric Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Now, without further ado, let's get right back into Tao Te Ching 22. As we discussed previously, the title for this chapter is Hold On to Oneness. Hold to the oneness. The oneness of the Tao, or simply the One. This is the central theme for this entire chapter. As we discussed, holding on to the One has a specific meaning in the Tao, as Lao Tzu explains in this chapter, and as we have followed the discussion from line to line. We started by looking at the entire chapter, 17 lines total. As usual, the chapter is divided into several sections. So of course, the first thing we do is to see where the sectional divisions are. These are the sections of this chapter, 3 sections in all. The beginning one is talking about yielding, being low, meaning being humble, and also to be careful about having excess. In the second section, which is what we were able to cover last time, Lao Tzu talks about hold to the One, to embrace the oneness of the Tao, and using that oneness as a standard or an example for everybody in the world. So there are 4 specific things about not flaunting, not being presumptuous, not praising oneself, and not boasting. We were able to cover all that, and we got to the beginning of the last section. The last section is all about non-contention. And this is the slide that we were able to get to previously. This is talking about how the One is what the sages use to establish an example. And the most important thing we noted previously was that the One was a continuation from the previous chapter. The previous chapter ended with this. Lao Tzu pointed to the Tao and said this. We can see how this chapter expands on that. The oneness of the Tao that we are directing our attention to right now at this moment in time. We also looked at this illustration last time. Lao Tzu says the sages hold to the one to set an example for all of us. We went through the internal and external aspects of this concept. To the left, we have what goes on in the mind of the sages. What are the sages thinking internally? And as you can see in this slide, the sages feel no need to flaunt or show off. And they do not presume they must always be right about everything. So this represents the internal state of mind for the sages. To the right, we have the external manifestations that originated from the internal mindset. How do the sages act towards people? And as you can see in this slide, they do not praise themselves to others. They do not boast about their achievements to other people. All of these together paint the picture of a wise person who is exceptionally accomplished and yet remains humble. And that's an important characteristic that describes all sages. So we ended our discussion on this particular slide just as we were getting into the topic of non-contention. In this slide, we have the basic framework on non-contention taught by the ancients and in turn conveyed by Lao Tzu. When it comes to non-contention, the aim is to minimize struggle and strife in one's life. That is what contention brings. And in order to do that, it uses yielding and adaptability in practical applications. And this is what we looked at in the beginning of this particular chapter. It is open to alternate paths to a peaceful resolution. This is being aware that different possibilities exist. It is open to stepping back in order to move forward. Now, of all these, the yielding, taking a detour, stepping back, these are all exactly as described in the first section of this chapter. When we look at these basics, one may think non-contention and pacifism seem very similar. They seem to be very much alike to one another. And the similarity we can note is that the Tao of non-contention and pacifism both abhor violence and they both advocate peace. However, there are some differences that we will highlight as we discuss non-contention in depth. To start with, pacifism is ideological and absolute, while the Tao is adaptable and spontaneous. Yet another difference we can note is that pacifism is that which rejects conflicts entirely. The Tao puts the focus on navigating around conflicts skillfully, as we have seen in this chapter. So the end result may be similar, but we can tell the mindsets and methods are not exactly the same. So this brings us to the beginning of our discussion line by line today. Line 13. because they do not contend. They is referencing the sages. Non-contention begins with the realization that we do not need to engage. This is what the sages know. It is the question to ask oneself, who says I have to fight? And what if I don't fight? So in the West, we have similar wisdom. In the West, we have a saying, it takes two to tango. So if you do not involve yourself in conflict, that is the beginning of the peaceful resolution that one wishes to accomplish. The way that we can do that is by maintaining perceptive awareness. So we can detect the signals of a conflict about to begin. We can recognize when a situation is likely to escalate. For instance, if you sense the emotional intensity rising, and this is when we talk about how in a situation people start to get hot under the collar, or we say steam is starting to come out of the ears. Both of these expressions use temperature as a metaphor, a signal of the need to cool off, to take the temperature down. Yet another indication, another signal for conflict about to escalate is if you detect the exchange going around in circles. That is, both sides are repeating the same points over and over again. This leads to frustration for everybody involved. So the thing to do from the Tao cultivator's perspective is to state your peaceful intention clearly. There is a lot of power in letting the others know that you're not going there with them. They may be spoiling for a fight, but you're not going there. When you see the other person becoming aggressive, it is time to shift the focus, to gently redirect the conversation if and when appropriate. For instance, there may be multiple issues on the table, several things. And if that is the case, it may be better to move on to something else and return to a topic that is particularly triggering at a later time. You can shift the order of discussion, and that can give everybody a breather. The other thing to note is that a Tao cultivator, when facing the possibility of contention escalating, can walk away, just walk away if necessary, because it may be better to work on something else first. And here I would note that so much about life is about timing. The wrong timing gets everybody into contention. Shifting the timing around a little bit, avoiding the peak of emotions, coming back at a later time can be a skillful use, a skillful maneuver to make things a little easier for everybody. To disengage, that doesn't mean you're giving in. To disengage is a mindful choice to preserve your well-being, your calmness, and avoid a conflict that is not necessary to begin with. So the last thing that I'll note and emphasize is that no one can force you to engage in a conflict against your will. So think about how this idea is different from what we often hear as we go through our lives. People say things like, "Look what you made me do." That's a fallacy because we are all responsible for our own actions. So to recognize that clearly, we can avert a lot of contention in this way. It is the power to promote peace. Line 14. The world cannot contend with them. This follows the previous line. Because the sages do not contend, therefore the world cannot contend with them. And it is what we were talking about, that it takes two to tango. Therefore, the sages will disengage and not follow the aggressor into escalating the situation. Now, the sages have this effortless aura of calmness. It is tied to the concepts expressed in the beginning of this chapter, as well as previous chapters. So I want to summarize them into just a few points as a reminder for everybody. The first is the soft approach. In the beginning of this chapter, Lao Tzu talks about this as being flexible, to yield, to bend, like a tree bending to a strong wind. This is the ability to be flexible as the situation warrants it, to change the approach when it is necessary or when it is better. So the sages realize that conflicts will often arise from resistance. The events that we encounter have a certain flow to them. The more we resist that natural flow, the more likely it is that conflicts will arise. But when you embrace change and when you recognize that everything is constantly evolving, the situation is going to be different from one moment to the next, then you have more of an ability to flow with it. It's connected to the concept of Wu Wei, to act in alignment with that flow, with minimal effort, no attachments, allowing the situation to unfold organically. It is the acceptance of the situation as it is. And there's no need to rail against it, which would only create friction. It is also observing and adapting to what you perceive. This can help you find solutions that arise effortlessly. There's no need to force a particular outcome. So the soft approach by itself can be very powerful. And the second one that Lao Tzu also talks about in the beginning of this chapter is a mindset of receptive openness, meaning humility. To be receptive is to be willing to learn, to be ready to listen. And the description from Lao Tzu in this chapter is about the metaphor of the low places being filled with water. So when you are humble, you realize your perspective is not the only one. And this gives you the wisdom to yield, and it makes everything easier, not harder, for other people to see your perspective. It does not mean giving up on your principles. It's all about finding ways to accommodate different viewpoints. And there's no need to engage in heated debates for that to happen. The sages cultivate and foster internal harmony. This is being at peace with yourself. When you feel the joy of contentment in life, this is about living mindfully and having that inner stability, which will make you less reactive to external stimuli. So, what the sages have always observed since antiquity is that those who harbor a state of internal agitation, feeling annoyed, feeling anxious, those are the people who can be easily provoked by outside forces. You've seen this to be true. You've also felt this firsthand. When you feel agitated inside, something that somebody else says can easily trigger you. So, if you are able to let that go, if you do not harbor that agitation like the sages, then you too can possess this equilibrium that is not prone to disturbance. And then we have compassion. This is spoken of elsewhere in the Tao Te Ching. It is important. It's about understanding, seeking to understand other people and not demand to be understood. And even if there is disagreement, understanding allows you to find common ground, and that can benefit all parties involved. It's an empathetic approach. It can be very disarming because it can resolve a potential conflict before it occurs. All of these together, these points, results in the ability to establish peace, with the notes here that just because you are able to avoid fighting, it does not imply an inability to fight. People find it difficult to contend against you because your approach is not confrontational. You gain the ability to avoid meeting force with force, which is what most people do. And as we saw in the previous section of this chapter, you recognize that there's no need to flaunt. You do not brag about yourself. You do not presume that you are right. And all of these remove the reasons of contention against you. The last note on this chapter is that the greatest warriors from Chinese history, which is spanning thousands of years, these warriors have all been students and cultivators of the Tao. Despite having tremendous skills in battle, these warriors prefer not to fight. They practice the Tao of non-contention. And that is because they recognize there are no true winners in battle or personal combat. They will fight when they have to, but only with the realization that it is a negative mark against them because they did not see it coming. They failed to see the conflict coming, and they failed to resolve it before it escalated. They did not diffuse it before it actually turned into battle. So to them, the ultimate victory is to win without fighting, by turning the enemy into an ally. They were not pacifistic, but they were definitely non-contentious. Line 15. What the ancients called the one who yields and remains whole. This is a reference to the ancient teachings that Lao Tzu studied. Lao Tzu worked as chief archivist of the royal archives. In that capacity, he had access to many ancient scrolls that are now lost to history. He learned the teaching of the ancients, he understood their emphasis of peace above all, and he infused his writing of the Tao Te Ching with their concepts. Today, most of what we know about the ancients that Lao Tzu studied is not direct, but inferred, based on inference. We can see what they must have taught Lao Tzu through the scrolls. We can see that they must have emphasized the importance of balance, that is, the yin and yang. The ancient masters thought deeply about the interplay of complementary forces. They emphasized balance in all aspects of life. And this became central to the Tao, embracing not just the oneness, but the duality. So the yin would be embodying a fluid adaptability, and it will enhance your holistic well-being, that is, maintain wholeness. Yielding, or the soft approach in life, is a natural way to counter or balance the contention, the yang that arises in the world. Another thing that the ancient masters emphasized was the simplicity of nature. They spoke of, and Lao Tzu learned as their students, that a return to simplicity and living in accordance with nature is a goal in the Tao. So the virtues of a modest lifestyle, free from excessive desires or artificial contrivance. In such a simple life, you find contentment in what is essential, and you avoid the complexity that are simply unnecessary. This is also connected to non-contention because nothing complicates life like contending against other people. All kinds of complications will come up when you are actively contentious. So good travelers in the journey of life value simplicity, prefer and preserve simplicity, move away from the likely trouble spots. Wide invite problems. As an example, when Tao cultivators today are on the road, they have every reason to keep their eyes on driving conditions, that is, being perceptive and observant. They yield to incoming traffic as the traffic laws dictate, and realizing it doesn't cost anything to let others go first. They maintain the ability to shift gears and change lanes based on what is happening around them on the road. Another thing that we can tell Lao Tzu must have learned from the ancient masters was the cultivation of virtues. Lao Tzu spoke of the ancients advocating the virtues, qualities like compassion, patience, integrity, and so on. It is why the Tao Te Ching also encourages us to develop virtues. This is done through mindful living, self-reflection, and aligning what we do with the Tao. Chief among the virtues is humility, which is certainly emphasized in this chapter. It is the key in handling conflicts in a flexible way. And that is because ego causes clash, eventually leading to failure, regardless of outcome. Humility, on the other hand, will take you through the process of yielding, adjusting, changing, and then advancing to the real victory. So, out of all this, Lao Tzu speaks to the masters of antiquity, their emphasis on peace and their way to attain it. Because the scrolls have been lost thousands of years ago, we cannot know definitively what those scrolls contained. But with what we have in this chapter, we can get a very good idea. It sheds light on the rich tapestry of the Tao. Line 16. Were they speaking empty words? They referencing the masters of antiquity? It's a rhetorical question that Lao Tzu is asking. It is just a way to say, look, the ancients were not speaking empty words. And what they spoke of was of substance, especially when they spoke of remaining whole. What it meant was, first of all, maintaining calmness and composure in a stressful situation. I know that's easier said than done, but it is important. Staying cool is the very first order of business when you are facing contention in your life. This helps you remain whole, and in this context, wholeness means keeping it together, not fall apart, especially when it is so easy to lose yourself to anger. Holding on to our ethics, morals, principles, and virtues. That is yet another layer of remaining whole. Life is a stress test to us because life brings about pressures. Those pressures can break someone who is not prepared for them. If we truly understand the Tao, we will realize there is never any need to compromise what we hold dear. A lot of times, as we go through life, we see people feeling that they are forced to compromise their own values or principles. What Lao Tzu is saying is that to remain whole is to maintain your own integrity as a person. People can break, especially when they feel they are under attack. What we have to do differently is to navigate through conflicts without losing who we are or what we believe in. The observation of the sages is that you invariably will make things worse when you become a worse version of yourself. Everything you do and say will be worse than what you are capable of otherwise. The worst version of yourself, that isn't really you. You are more effective, indeed most effective, in resolving challenges in life when you are being true to yourself. That is the best version of yourself. Keeping this in mind can help you decide how to react to different situations. Do you bring forth the worst version of yourself or the better version? The voice of contention or the better angels of our nature? And wholeness is also about bringing peace to ourselves and to other people. As a Tao cultivator, your role in life is to be the peacemaker, the bringer of peace. You have the perspective to understand that when opposing forces clash, more friction is created, more potential for damage is out there. It is a pattern that repeats itself countless times in different ways among all of us humans. And this is exactly what the ancients have observed. And this is why they say yielding is by far the most effective way to break out of this pattern that repeats itself. Time and again, it is always the ones with this wisdom who can, first, they break themselves out of the destructive cycle. Then, second, they gain insights into the situation by looking at it from a different vantage point as they are out of the destructive cycle. And number three, they are able to interrupt the pattern for others, for those who are gearing up to do battle. And then number four, they're able to then awaken everybody to the reality of the harm they are about to cause. So these are the steps of the peacemaker or the bringer of peace. Lastly, this is all about the wholeness of preserving our physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. And the metaphor here that I'll use is that you and I, we can walk through the minefields of contention without setting off explosives. We can emerge better, stronger, and wiser than before. And we know, we can tell, we have seen when both parties in a conflict are rigid, solutions are elusive. It is only yielding of the ancients that can create the space to make dialogue a possibility, to allow for the more constructive approach to solve the problem and to establish a better understanding mutually. So there's a lot to unpack in these simple lines from Lao Tzu. And now we arrive at line 17. Sincerity, becoming whole, and returning to oneself. This is the most important line. It is the last line of this chapter. So I want to break it down into multiple parts, starting with the first character. This is the character for sincerity, honesty, being forthright, being straightforward, being a person of honor. So sincerity in this context is about listening with sincere intent. That means listening to the advice of the ancient masters with serious close attention. And the reason is because, as Lao Tzu points out, they were not speaking empty words. Their words must be noted. We heed the ancient masters, knowing they speak wisdom. They speak words of substance, and these words were backed by centuries of experience, observations in countless generations of Tao practitioners. Next, I want to focus on the second character in the line. This is the character for wholeness, to remain whole through yielding. And this is a teaching that we can apply to numerous contentious situations. This is better than a head-on collision. It does not mean surrendering. It does not mean giving up. It is what gives you the opportunity to seek out a better approach for a better outcome. So this is the wiser and smarter way to go. And the last character to focus on is the second from last character there. And it means return or returning. Returning to oneself, meaning the Tao within yourself. This is coming back full circle to the true self. And when we do that, we find that we have, number one, gone beyond the contentious obstacle that was blocking the path. Number two, we have kept our integrity whole as we navigated through the challenge, as we walk through the minefield. Remaining whole, we are true to ourselves and our original purpose. Now, in these three parts, you can see why I would say this last line is the most important. Now, let's take a look at an overall depiction of everything we have learned in this chapter. Sincerity and wholeness. First, I want to create a timeline from ancient times to modern times. You see, I have the ancients to the left. I have all of us to the right. I have the sages like Lao Tzu in the middle. Here's how the timeline looks. You can see that it spans thousands of years. And in this chapter, we have done that. We spanned centuries from the ancients to the sages like Lao Tzu to us. And if you look at the time notation, there's 5,000 years ago to the left, and the timeline to the past actually extends beyond that, but we're just using 5,000 years ago as an easy marker in the chronological scale. Then 4,000 years ago, 3,000 and 2,000. So the sages occupy the middle in that scale because the Warring States period, that time from ancient Chinese history, was from 2,500 years ago. So it's the midpoint between 3,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago. That's when the various sages, including Lao Tzu, lived. And then 1,000 years ago to the present day. I think it can be very useful to examine such a timeline because it gives us an overall perspective. We visually see the long chain of history with you and me, all of us, as the last link. And of course, beyond us, to the right of us in this scale, is the future. So starting with the ancients to the left, they actually go back further in time than 5,000 years ago, but 5,000, as I said, is a easy to remember marker, twice as long in the past as the time of Lao Tzu. These were the originators of the Tao tradition, the true origin of the Tao, the original Tao masters, if you will. The generations after them study their teachings. The wisest among the generations that followed them became Tao sages themselves. So in this chapter, Lao Tzu tells us the ancients, the ancient masters, have several important messages. So I will list them. The first one is about handling adversity. What the ancients say is that the best way to get through a negative situation unscathed, remaining whole, is to use a flexible and adaptable approach. The yielding approach, like the grass yielding to a strong wind, or even a tall tree bending to a strong wind. The second is about the importance of humility. To be humble is to be receptive, open up the possibility to learn something new, something we can use. And humility is represented further in the third box as well. Have a little and be in a position to receive. Be full of yourself and thus be unable to receive anything. This is tied to the third point about the consequence of excess. When we have too much of anything, we increase complexity. We make things more difficult for ourselves. This is the bottommost box, and you can see that it's connected to the third box. So what about the sages from 2,500 years ago? The time of the, as I said, the warring stage period of ancient Chinese history. Lao Tzu thought of himself as a cultivator of the Tao, not a sage. I want to make that clear here. As he wrote the Tao Te Ching, he did not think of himself as a sage. When he referred to a sage, he was talking about the masters he studied from. Subsequent generations definitely regarded him as a sage, but he did not think that about himself. He was thinking that about the generations that were his predecessors. He talked about them as setting a standard for the world, which of course included himself. And in doing so, they had four primary elements in their cultivation. The first was that they would never show off their knowledge or possession. The second was letting go of the need to be right. This was not just being humble, but also the best path in a situation where people disagree. The third was that they would never praise themselves for having virtues. Doing so reveals a severe lack of humility, contrary to the second message from the ancients. The fourth was that they would never boast about what they have accomplished. This is also closely related to the previous one because the human ego reveals itself in many different ways, like bragging. Now, the four elements that you see here are linked to the words of the ancients. To not show off their knowledge or possessions, that's definitely humility. To be flexible, to approach a situation with a humble heart and adjust as you go, that is also linked to the message of the ancients. So what about all of us? What can we take away from this? What about us living our modern lives in the modern world? So what we are being asked to do by Lao Tzu is to listen to the wisdom with sincere intent. That is the intention to put it into actual practice. And we're asked to apply what we have learned so that when we face an obstacle, we can become like water. We can adjust in a fluid way. Water is the softest substance in the world, and yet it overcomes. Furthermore, when facing contention, consider taking a step back. So people tend to think negatively about stepping back from conflict, but it is actually the wiser thing to do in by far the most contentious situations. Lastly, to remain whole is to maintain your peace, well-being, and integrity. No need to compromise any of that. This takes all of us to the final line from Lao Tzu. Sincerity, becoming whole, and returning to oneself. And I think what we have done is to bring clarity on these ancient words from Lao Tzu himself. This illustration, this slide, is marking the end of our line-by-line discussion of Tao Te Ching 22. So now we are ready to go into paraphrase for 22. The purpose here is to demonstrate understanding by expressing the original in our own words. So we start with the first section. This is now the familiar section talking about yielding, bending, being low, being humble, and then ending with a commentary on excess. So this is a paraphrase that I want to offer for everyone's consideration. The best way to live is with the soft approach. Handle contention with flexibility and yield in potential conflicts. Be like the tree that survives strong winds by bending. Maintain humility in staying low. And master old lessons to be ready for new ones. Be like the empty cup that can be filled with fresh tea. Recognize that when you have less, there is room for more. When you have too much, you end up with confusion. This applies to all aspects of life, including learning as well as material possessions. So this is the series of 3 character lines in the first section. Then we go into the second section, which is important as it talks about oneness and the 4 elements that when the sages embrace the oneness, and set a standard for the world, the four elements that they observe are paramount. So here is the paraphrase I would like to offer for that. With the above in mind, the sages hold to the oneness of the Tao to serve as an example for everyone. Despite their knowledge and wisdom, they never presume themselves to be correct. Despite their achievements, they never flaunt what they have accomplished. They do not praise their own qualities, and that is why they have merit. They do not boast about their abilities, and that is why their virtues withstand the test of time. Lastly, we have the third and final section of this chapter. This section, as we have seen, is all about non-contention. So here is the paraphrase I want to offer for your consideration. They are at peace, never contentious against anyone or anything. Therefore, no one and nothing whatever contend against them. They heed the words of the ancients, that yielding is the key to it all. They realize these are not empty words, so they apply them to life. That is how they are able to come full circle back to the Tao, returning to the oneness. So there you have it. This chapter that begins with the chapter title of Hold to the One ends on a note of returning to the One. And speaking of full circle, we can now end our discussion of this chapter by reminding ourselves of the full circle tying together the last part of this chapter to the beginning. So in the last lines of Tao Te Ching 22, Lao Tzu talks about listening to the ancients with a sincere resolve to apply their words. We can link this back to the beginning, and we see Lao Tzu pointing out the wisdom of knowing when to yield. And that is indeed the words of the ancients. The message is clear. Of all the teachings from the ancients, the most important in terms of practicality is their instruction on handling contention. It is crucial for living the Tao simply because it is the best way to avoid wasting one's time in clashing with others. The commentary that I want to add to this is that people tend to drastically underestimate the cost of engaging in conflicts. And the cost is not just time, but also energy. Contention itself is draining. Once you are mired in it, disengaging from contention is even more exhausting. This is true at every level of existence. Historically, we have numerous examples where nations plunge into war, expending its resources at a few years' rate, only to be stuck in the conflict without an easy way to extricate itself. It is the same for our lives. Clashing with others, no matter who, is one of the most costly ways to use your limited time in this world. And when it finally ends, when you finally get out of it, you realize you have lost a lot and gained nothing. So in this, the ancients, the sages, they all agree. When you and I face contention, it is not unlike a tree swaying in the strong winds. We too must weather the storm to be even stronger than before. We know how to yield, when to yield, and we will get through the negativity without being negatively affected. So when we think about the world today, we can reflect back on the time of Lao Tzu. His world was in turmoil when he wrote these words. The land of ancient China has splintered into various kingdoms in contention with one another. Corruption was rampant. He wrote about that too in Tao Te Ching 53. It was overall the reign of chaos. So everyday life for everybody was full of challenges. And that is all the more reason for Lao Tzu to offer the wisdom of the ancients as the best advice of all. Think about our world today. Our world is also in turmoil. Do we have contention? Yes. Do we have corruption? Yes. Do we have chaos? Yes. Human nature has not changed in 2,500 years. The best advice that Lao Tzu gave to the people of his time is still the best advice for us. So I talked several times about weathering a storm. That is happening right now. And the way for us to keep ourselves and our loved ones safe, to remain whole through this ordeal, is right here in this slide right in front of you. At a time when we need it the most, this is the Tao. Because they do not contend, the world cannot contend with them. It is now time to summarize the entire chapter, Tao Te Ching 22, before we move on to 23. This includes a reminder from previous summaries, which is about the first and second sections of the chapter. Previously, we talked about living the Tao using the flexible approach while keeping your reasoning and your aim, your goal straight. And as a reminder, to remain whole is to maintain your dignity. No need to compromise. And number two, the humble heart. We talked about how a common misconception was to associate being low, humble, with being lowly, humiliation. The Tao of humility in reality is sourced in the true courage of compassion. Lastly, less and more. Less is more. This means simplifying your life to maximize your joy. Having less just means you can receive more goodness, more positive energy. Then, more is less. And this is because too many choices lead to paralysis. We also did a summary for the second section, which was all about oneness. Here it is again. Embracing the one. And it is important for us to remember what the one is. The one what? Starting with the oneness of this. It connects us in this chapter to the previous chapter. This was in this place in your life, this moment in time, following this direction to this one path of the Tao. Oneness is also the unity of the mind. Think about what is happening right now, all of us together, with our focus on the Tao. Then, the unified purpose. This is about not just understanding and benefiting from the Tao, but to pass it on. Pass it on to more people, pass it on toward the future. And we also touched on oneness as the central void. This is memorably captured in the metaphor where the spokes of a wheel join together in the emptiness of the hub. That emptiness is the void of the Tao. If you extend that metaphor to cover life itself, the spokes of our lives join together in the voidness of the Tao as well. It is because of the emptiness of the Tao that it gives function. In the wheel, it gives the chariot the function of a vehicle. For us, it gives us the functionalities we need in life. Then, oneness as in the one thing, the one key, the master key of life, the most crucial element, whatever that is, for you, right here, right now, and in your life. And lastly, oneness as in the one source, the unified source, the origin of creation itself, whatever it is that everything traces back to. And for many people, it is easier to grasp that singular source of creation as God the Creator. And now, the last summary that covers everything we talked about today. So, our topic today was focusing on non-contention. So, what Lao Tzu is telling us, number one, is to follow the sages. This is the assurance that you and I, we too can become naturally harmonious and peaceful. And when I say we follow them, this is in response to the passage that says the sages embrace oneness to set an example for the world. Because they embody humility as a virtue, they do not flaunt, presume, boast, etc. Those are the examples that we should also follow. Now, another important thing is to accept responsibility. This is the underlying requirement for this chapter. What it says is that I am responsible for my life, and I can tell that I have that responsibility because looking back, I have seen for myself that for every conflict I was ever involved with, I was there. I had a crucial role, indispensable role in all of those conflicts. Therefore, I, at minimum, bear some of the responsibilities, and in the Tao, it says you bear all responsibilities. You have all of that right in your hands. This can be useful for us because those who point the blame to others, think about the number of times when we hear people say, well, they started it. Well, those people that point the blame away from themselves, they will always be the victim of contention. On the other hand, those who understand the Tao and take charge of the situation will naturally have the power to change it. So, taking charge. How can we do that? We can focus on removing ourselves as the cause. And how can we do that? This chapter provides the guidance and the steps. We start by being humble and then go from there. Understanding how to yield, understand yielding. We listen to the words of the ancients to yield and remain whole. We let go of the urge to prove ourselves correct or to dominate a conversation. We adapt to the situation, and the realization is that it is by no means difficult to work my way around obstacles. Oftentimes, when people are stiff, unyielding, they say, I'm not going to move. I'm not going to yield. You yield. Everybody else, the world has to yield to me. And that results in a static situation. On the other hand, we can change our approach. It allows us to continue going straight to the destination. To go straight to the destination is not necessarily a literal straight line from one point to another. What it means is taking the most efficient path. That most efficient path, we know through experience in life, it's usually not a straight line from one point to another. In most cases, the path works its way around landmarks and the terrain. Or you have to follow the streets and the crossroads. So we already do this very often. When we see a detour sign on the road, we follow that detour sign. With the above, it becomes easy and natural for us to not contend against anyone so that no one will contend against us. The attainment is greater peace and harmony in our lives, and we can all use that. We become more sage-like. We decrease the friction and conflicts in our lives. So, this is the secret of the ancients to live the good life. When you break it down, these are the components and these are the steps. And this concludes the totality of our discussion on chapter 22 of the Tao Te Ching. We're nearing the top of the hour, so I want to jump ahead to the end of our presentation today. Share the Tao. The easiest way to access Tao resources is to visit my author website, directlink.com. There, you can click on links and go to the web page where you will find everything listed, such as Taoism.net with information about the Tao and also about this meeting. Our Facebook community where you can ask questions or discuss your thoughts on the Tao with others. Our YouTube channel where you can watch recordings of all our previous meetings. My Amazon author page, where you can find books and audiobooks for your continuing exploration. You can go directly with the web address directlink.com/links, as you can see. You can use these resources to share the Tao with the people you know who may be interested. When you see the benefits of Tao cultivation in your life, you can share your experience with others through your comments in Facebook or YouTube. If you find my books or audiobooks to be helpful, you can post your reviews on Amazon to help others discover the Tao. This is the path that I am on, so I can say sharing the Tao has benefited me personally in every aspect of life. I would like to invite you to come along with me to share the Tao. Let us travel together on the path in the journey of life. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.